Strange sounds beneath the floor. Thomas lived alone in an old, rusty mining station on a forgotten moon. It was dark, cold, and always quiet, just the way he liked it. After years of working in noisy factories on Earth, silence had become his best friend. But recently, something had changed. Every night, just before he fell asleep, Thomas heard a strange sound. At first, he thought it was just rats' tiny claws scratching at the walls or crawling beneath the floor. He had seen a few before, and they never caused much trouble. But this sound was different. It wasn't random. It was slow, steady, like a pattern. Scratch, pause, scratch, scratch, pause. He tried to ignore it for days. Maybe it was just the station cooling down at night. Maybe it was in his head. But one night, the scratching turned into tapping. It was soft but clear. Tap, 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 and silence. Then again, tap, tap. Thomas sat up in bed. He stared at the floor. The sound was coming from the corner of the room near a storage panel he never used. Slowly he got up, walked over, and knelt down. He pressed his ear to the cold metal plate. The tapping stopped. He waited. Then tap. Tap, tap. His heart began to race. This wasn't a rat. It was too slow, too careful. It felt intelligent. The next day, he brought out his tools and opened the panel. Behind it, he found an old maintenance hatch, half buried under dust and wires. It looked like no one had touched it in years. He unscrewed the bolts and opened the hatch. A deep, dark tunnel stretched down into shadows. A foul, warm smell came from below, like damp metal and something else. Something alive. Thomas shined his flashlight inside and crawled down. The tunnel was narrow and dirty, filled with pipes and strange symbols etched into the wall. He followed the path for several meters, his breath loud in the silence. Then he saw it, a small figure curled in the corner of the tunnel. Thin arms, pale skin that shimmered faintly, hair like silver threads. The figure flinched when the light hit her face. Thomas froze. It was a girl. An alien girl. She looked young. Maybe the size of a child, but her eyes were ancient, big, and glowing faint blue. She tried to speak, but no words came. She coughed and backed away, scared. Thomas raised his hands to show he meant no harm. He placed a bottle of water on the ground and slowly pushed it toward her. She stared at it. Her hands were shaking. After a moment, she grabbed it and drank like she hadn't had water in days. Thomas looked around. There were scratches on the walls, old food wrappers, and a blanket that was torn and dirty. She had been living here for a long time, hiding. But from what? Why was she locked down here? He wanted to ask questions, but she didn't speak his language. Still, there was fear in her eyes. Fear of being found. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. The sound he thought was a rat was really a cry for help. A living being had been just under his floor, suffering. While he lived his quiet life above, he didn't know who she was or what she was running from. But one thing was clear: his life on the quiet moon station was about to change forever. And deep inside, he knew someone or something was going to come looking for her. The girl who shouldn't be there. Thomas couldn't stop thinking about her. All night, he stared at the ceiling, replaying the moment he saw her curled up in the darkness. She wasn't just any alien. There was something different about her, something strange and sad. She wasn't aggressive. She wasn't wild. She was scared. And she was hiding like a hunted animal. The next morning, he brought more water and soft food from his supplies. He climbed back down into the tunnel and found her still in the same spot, sitting with her knees pulled to her chest. When she saw him again, she didn't flinch this time. Her eyes met his, cautious but less afraid. Thomas didn't speak. He simply sat a few feet away and placed the food between them. She waited a moment, then slowly reached out. She picked up a food packet, sniffed it, and took a bite. Her hands were so thin he could see the bones under her pale, glowing skin. He tried to speak, but she tilted her head in confusion. She didn't understand him. Instead of words, he pointed to himself and said, "Thomas." Then he pointed to her. She blinked. Then, shyly, she placed her small hand on her chest and whispered something too soft to understand. She didn't look like a fighter. She didn't act like a soldier. But then Thomas noticed something that made his skin crawl. Around her wrists were marks, thin, deep scars, as if she had been chained. One was still red. He didn't ask questions. He didn't have to. She had been someone's prisoner. Later that day, Thomas returned to check the rest of the tunnel. A few meters past her corner, he found something even stranger, symbols scratched into the metal walls. They weren't graffiti. They were patterns, repeating lines, strange shapes, and warnings. Then he saw a small device, half broken, stuck to a panel. He pulled it loose and brought it back to the surface. It was an old audio recorder. When he powered it on, it began playing a voice not human. The words were strange, but there were short parts that had been translated. One line kept repeating in a cold, mechanical tone. "Do not release the subject. Do not trust the subject." Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. Who left this message? Who is the subject? The girl? That night, the girl finally left the tunnel and climbed into his room. She moved like a shadow, careful and silent. She sat on the floor and watched him from the corner. When he looked at her, she didn't hide. She pointed at the broken recorder, then pressed her finger to her lips. Silence. He nodded slowly. Then she pressed her hand to her chest again and whispered the same word from before. But this time, something strange happened. The lights in the room flickered. The air grew still. And Thomas felt a light pressure in his head, like someone had gently knocked on his mind. He didn't understand the word, but somehow he felt it. It was more than a name. It was a warning and a promise. This girl wasn't supposed to be here, and whoever locked her up didn't just want her gone. They wanted her forgotten. Hidden messages and the secret map. Thomas couldn't stop thinking about the voice on the recorder. Do not release the subject. Those words kept echoing in his mind like a threat. But when he looked at the girl, weak, quiet, barely even able to speak, she didn't seem dangerous. She seemed lost. The next day, Thomas went back down into the tunnel alone. He needed answers. Past the girl's corner, the tunnel turned sharply. That's when he saw something he hadn't noticed before, a narrow metal door hidden behind loose panels. It took effort, but he forced it open. Inside was a storage chamber, dusty and dim. Most of it was empty, but one item sat in the center of the room on a broken crate. It was a small cube, smooth, black, and warm to the touch. When he picked it up, it lit up with soft blue lines and projected a faint, glowing map in the air. It showed a 3D layout of the station and below it, a second layer, a hidden level, a place that didn't exist on any of Thomas's blueprints. A red marker blinked on the lower level, labeled in alien script. But next to it, someone had scrawled a translation in messy handwriting. Lab Core Classified Containment. Essay. Thomas stared at the map. He heard a soft rustle behind him. He turned around fast, only to find the girl watching him from the tunnel. She had followed him silently. Her eyes were wide, focused on the cube. When she saw the red mark, she shook her head violently and backed away. Thomas tried to speak calmly. "What's down there? What were they doing to you?" But again, she didn't understand. She just pressed her fingers to her lips and pointed at the cube. Then she stepped forward and touched one glowing line on the map. The light changed. A second red mark appeared, this one closer to the surface. It was an escape hatch hidden behind an old mining shaft. She looked at him, eyes pleading, and whispered, "Home, go, danger. Them. Thomas felt like a puzzle was being laid in front of him, piece by piece. This wasn't just about her being trapped. This was about something hidden under the station, something people didn't want found. Back in his quarters, Thomas examined the cube again. He noticed a small slot on one side. After searching his gear, he found an old data chip that fit perfectly. The cube glowed brighter and played another recording. A human voice this time, male, tired and afraid. If anyone finds this, she's not what they say she is. They lied. She's not the threat they are. The lab, it's not a lab. It's a vault, and they were using her to open it. The recording cut off. Thomas felt a cold weight settle in his chest. The girl wasn't just a runaway. She was the key to something buried, something important. And someone had gone to great lengths to make sure no one would ever know. That night, the girl came into his room again. She sat close this time and gently touched his arm. Her skin was cold. Her eyes met his, serious and soft. Then she closed her eyes and showed him something, not with words, not with pictures, with feeling. In that moment, Thomas saw shadows, lights, metal doors, pain, and something glowing deep below the station. Something that was waiting to wake up. Asterisk. The men who built the trap Thomas had always believed the moon station was just a forgotten mining outpost, old tech, broken systems, no secrets. But now, every time he looked at its rusted walls and blinking lights, he saw something else. He saw a cage built by men who knew exactly what they were hiding. He couldn't stop thinking about the recording. She's not the threat they are. Who were they? The cube map led him to an old command center sealed behind thick steel doors. It took him hours to break through the security systems. Dust and silence greeted him inside. Dead monitors, burnt wires, and one flickering screen still connected to the mainframe. When he tapped the screen, a hidden archive opened. There were files, dozens of them, labeled in code, but some had human names. One folder caught his eye. Project Heavenfall. Subject Control, Phase 2. Inside, Thomas found old research logs, experiment results, security reports. One photo made his breath catch. It was her. The alien girl, but not like now. In the photo, she was locked in a glass chamber, surrounded by soldiers and scientists, with weapons pointed at her. The date was 6 years ago. Thomas read more. The logs described her as a living access key. Her DNA matched with a vault hidden beneath the station. The scientists had failed to open the vault, but they believed she could if conditioned properly. That word made Thomas sick. Even worse, the log said she escaped. Not alone, there was another subject. Male. Dangerous. He was never found. Thomas closed the file, feeling dizzy. They didn't build the hatch to trap rats. They built it to trap her. And maybe worse, to lure her back. Suddenly, a sharp beep echoed through the room. Thomas looked up at a flashing light on the screen. Inbound signal, military shuttle, 46 hours. Someone was coming. They weren't finished with her. He rushed back to his room, heart pounding. The girl was sitting in the corner, hugging her knees, staring at the floor. When she saw him, she stood slowly and touched his hand. Thomas whispered, "They're coming?" Her eyes closed. Her body tensed. She already knew. That night, neither of them slept. The station creaked under the weight of secrets. Outside, the stars burned cold. Thomas stared at the hatch where he first found her and realized something terrifying. He wasn't just part of the story now. He was in the middle of a war, and he didn't even know who the real enemy was yet. Asterisk, escape tunnel, and the choice. Thomas knew he had little time. The military shuttle would arrive in less than 2 days, and when it did, they would not come to ask questions. They would come to take her. or worse. He had seen the files, heard the recordings, read the twisted notes left behind. She wasn't just a test subject to them, she was a key. A living tool, a thing, but to Thomas, she had become something more. Not just a secret, not just a mystery. She had become real. He brought out the old cube again. He traced the escape route she had shown him, the one leading to a blocked mining shaft on the edge of the outpost. It was dangerous. No lights. No support beams. One wrong step and the tunnel could collapse. But it was their only way out. The girl watched him prepare. She never spoke much, but her eyes followed every move. She understood what was happening. She was ready. They waited until station power dipped for the night. That's when the station grew quiet and the old systems ran on backup power. In that silence, they entered the service hatch again and crawled through the tunnels, the girl leading the way this time. She moved with strange grace, like she remembered every path, every corner. But halfway through, Thomas heard something behind them. A sound too heavy for rats, slow, careful footsteps. He stopped, held his breath, and turned off his light. In the dark, they waited. A faint green glow moved behind them. Someone else was in the tunnels, multiple shadows. They were scanning. Searching. Thomas whispered, "We have to move now." They hurried forward, their path narrowing until it was barely wide enough to crawl. Dirt crumbled from above with every movement. The girl squeezed through a sharp turn and paused. She looked back at him. There was something in her eyes he hadn't seen before. Not fear. Guilt. Then she pointed up at a small panel on the tunnel ceiling, a second hatch different from the one they entered. She reached into a crack and pulled out a small disc with glowing lines. Thomas took it and placed it in his pocket. "What is this?" he whispered. She placed her hand on his chest and said softly, "You choose." Before he could ask what she meant, the tunnel behind them echoed with sharp, heavy sounds. Boots. Voices. Someone was closing in. They reached the shaft. Broken beams, half-flooded floor, thick dust in the air. The exit was just beyond a collapsed wall. Thomas grabbed a tool and began smashing through the blockage. Rocks fell. His hands bled. She tried to help, but she was shaking. Her body was weak, but she didn't stop. Then, just as the path opened wide enough, Thomas saw a light beam flash behind them. They had been spotted. The girl looked at him. Then, without a word, she stepped in front of the beam. Her skin shimmered, and the light bent around her. A loud ringing filled the tunnel as the soldiers shouted and fell back. She turned to Thomas with a trembling voice. "Go." But Thomas didn't move. He grabbed her hand and pulled her through the last wall of rubble. They collapsed on the other side. Coughing in the cold air of the outer crater, they were free for now. But Thomas knew something was changing inside her. And he feared the choice she had just given him might change the world. Betrayal at the landing zone. Desert wind outside the station felt like knives against Thomas's face. He hadn't seen the stars this clearly in years. The moon sky was wide, silent, and empty, but not for long. The shuttle was coming, and someone had already made contact. They followed the cracked path toward an old mining landing zone. The girl moved slower now, her steps unsteady. She hadn't eaten properly in days, and her glow was fading. Thomas tried to help her walk, but she kept waving him off, refusing to be seen as weak. When they reached the landing zone, Thomas was surprised to see lights already active. The signal beacon was powered up. Someone had been here recently. Recently. That's when he heard the voice. "Thomas, you shouldn't be here." It was Commander Hale, his old supervisor, a man Thomas once trusted. Hale had been part of the original outpost crew before most were reassigned or disappeared. Thomas had assumed Hale retired years ago. But now he stood here, wearing a clean uniform and holding a stun rifle, smiling like he already knew everything. "You found her," Halle said, eyes cold. "I knew someone would eventually open that hatch." Thomas stepped in front of the girl. "She's not going back." Halle raised an eyebrow. "Going back?" "Thomas, she was never meant to survive out here. She's property. She's the key. That's all." The girl didn't speak, but her body shook. Not in fear, but rage. Her eyes turned brighter, the soft blue turning into a sharp white glow. Thomas didn't wait. He grabbed a rock and threw it at the control box, shutting down the beacon. Halle fired his stun rifle, missing by inches. The shot hit the ground, cracking the stone beside them. The girl stepped forward suddenly and let out a sound, not a scream, not a cry, but something in between. A pulse of energy burst from her chest like a ripple in the air. Hale's rifle sparked, short-circuited, and exploded in his hand. He fell back. Yelling in pain, Thomas grabbed the girl's hand and ran. They dashed across the rocky ground toward an old cargo lift that led down into the canyon. But just before reaching it, a black drone dropped from the sky, blocking their path. It aimed a scanner at the girl. She didn't hesitate. Her eyes flared, and the drone systems died instantly. It felt like a stone. Thomas turned to her, breathing hard. "What are you?" She looked at him and, for the first time, answered in a full sentence, slow, broken, but clear. "I was made to open the vault." He didn't understand. "What vault?" She pointed to the horizon, where the canyon dropped into shadows. "The place below. They built it to hide something. I am the key." Thomas stared at her, realizing the truth. She wasn't just running from her captors. She was carrying something inside her, something ancient, something powerful, and now that she was free, others would come for it. Suddenly, the sky rumbled. A military shuttle cut through the clouds, heading toward the landing zone. Its lights scanned the ground, searching. There was no time. Thomas turned to her. "Do we run, or do we fight?" She didn't answer. She only reached out her hand, and this time Thomas took it without hesitation. Together, they disappeared into the shadows of the canyon. And far below, something stirred in the dark. What? Was really under the hatch deep within the canyon. The walls grew narrower and the air colder. Thomas could barely see, but the girl's faint glow lit the path just enough. They had left the military behind for now, but something told him the real danger wasn't chasing them. It was waiting ahead. The deeper they went, the more unnatural the tunnels became. These weren't part of the mining station. The metal here was smooth, untouched by rust or age. Strange lights pulsed softly in the walls, responding to the girl's presence. The very ground seemed to breathe beneath their feet. Finally, they reached it. A massive door stood in the center of a wide chamber carved into the stone. Not a regular door. This one had no handles, no seams. It looked like a single piece of living metal, marked with symbols Thomas had never seen before. At its center was a circular indentation shaped like a hand, but not a human hand. The girl stepped forward. She looked weaker than ever, but there was something in her eyes, something unshakable. Slowly she placed her palm against the door. The symbols lit up. The ground shook, and the door opened with a deep, groaning sound, revealing a chamber filled with blinding white light. Inside were hundreds of floating orbs, each glowing softly. Thomas stepped in carefully. It felt like walking into the heart of a storm, but silent. The orbs reacted to him, but when the girl entered, they all began to hum together like a chorus. She walked to the center of the room and stood before a large crystal embedded in the floor. Her voice trembled, but she spoke clearly. "This is memory, my people's last gift. They hid it before the war." Thomas was stunned. "War? What war?" She turned to him. Long ago, before humans, my kind, built vaults across the stars to keep knowledge safe, but some wanted power, not peace. So we locked it away. I was born to unlock one. Thomas stepped back. So that's why they wanted you. She nodded. They wanted the weapon hidden in memory. He looked around again. Is it really a weapon? She placed her hand on the crystal. It lit up, showing images in the air planets, cities, faces. A galaxy before it burned. Not a weapon, she whispered. A warning. Then she showed him what the military had feared, a recording of an ancient race, once peaceful, turning into monsters after unlocking too much too fast. The vault didn't just contain history. It was alive. It remembered Dot, and now it remembered him. The girl stepped forward, her glow dimming. This place, it needs a guardian now. Thomas shook his head. You can't stay. They'll come. For you, she smiled softly. They won't see me. They'll see you. Thomas felt something press against his chest. He looked down. The disc she gave him earlier was glowing. It sank into his skin, painless but final. She backed away into the light. You opened the hatch. You chose to see. Now you are the lock. Before he could reply, the crystal's light surrounded her, and she vanished. Thomas stood alone in the glowing chamber. But he wasn't afraid. He understood now. He had thought he was saving her from a prison, but all along, she was saving them from what waited behind that hatch. And now it was his turn to guard the secret.